He called the old man useless, spat at his boots, then slapped him in broad daylight in a crowded Los Angeles diner, phones filming, people watching. No one stepped in. But here's what he didn't know, that old man once pulled soldiers from burning wreckage in Cambodia. He trained the very Marines stationed just 30 minutes away, and when they showed up, they didn't knock, didn't ask. They took the diner back, like it was the LA riots all over again. Where in the world are you watching from? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe to Veteran Biker, where silence isn't weakness and forgotten heroes don't stay forgotten. Tomorrow's story might hit even harder. Now, watch what happens next. The bell above the diner door gave a lazy jingle as Raymond Walker stepped inside. He paused for a brief second, letting his eyes adjust to the contrast between the sharp California sun and the shaded interior of the small Los Angeles diner. The air inside was thick with the scent of grilled onions, grease, and decades-old coffee. A few customers looked up at him, brief glances, then back to their burgers, phones, or half-hearted conversations. He walked slowly but deliberately, his cane tapping lightly against the scuffed linoleum floor. His movements bore no sign of fragility, just age. On his head, a faded Marine Corps cap, the emblem threadbare but still unmistakable. His windbreaker was zipped halfway, and an old campaign ribbon pin clung to the collar. Small, almost forgettable, unless you knew what to look for. He slid into a booth by the window, facing out onto the street. Outside, the smog-drenched skyline of Los Angeles hung in a haze above power lines and palm trees, as if the city were holding its breath. A waitress, no more than 20, approached with a tablet and a practiced smile. "What can I get for you, sir?" "Coffee, black, and a tuna melt if the cook still remembers how to make it." Her smile faltered for a split second, then returned. Coming right up, it started like any other lunch hour, until the door jingled again. A group of 4 burst in, leather jackets, torn jeans, sunglasses still on indoors. Their laughter was loud, forced, the kind that needed to be heard, needed to fill the space. Bikers, not the honorable kind. The ones who carried the reputation without earning it. They stomped in like they owned the place, shoving past a couple leaving their table and sprawling into a corner booth. One of them, taller, bulkier, and clearly the ringleader, lit a cigarette under the no-smoking sign. The waitress tried to protest, but he just waved her off like a buzzing fly. Raymond didn't look. He didn't need to. He'd seen that posture before, posturing before pain, always in those who had never faced real stakes. He sipped his coffee, steam curling under the brim of his cap. But they noticed him. "Hey, Grandpa!" one of them called across the diner. "You forget what year it is? Thought they shipped all you fossils off already." Laughter, sharp, hollow. Raymond didn't flinch. The waitress returned, tray in hand, eyes darting between the 2 booths. She placed the plate and coffee in front of him quickly, trying not to make eye contact. "Don't mind them," she murmured. "They're regulars, but not the good kind." He nodded once, figured, but the tall one stood up, slowly, deliberately, the kind of movement that draws attention. He walked toward Raymond's booth, dragging his heavy boots across the floor like a challenge. The entire diner quieted, forks suspended halfway to mouths, phones lowered. Only the ceiling fan dared to move. "What's that you got there?" the man said, pointing at the ribbon pin. "You one of those fake war heroes?" Still no answer. He leaned down close enough that Raymond could smell the mix of alcohol, cologne, and something synthetic. "Tell you what," he said, voice low, "take that crap off before someone does it for you." Then, without warning, crack, he slapped the cap off Raymond's head. It landed on the floor with a soft thud. Gasps. One woman stood up, then sat right back down. The waitress backed away, phone trembling in her hand. Raymond didn't move. He stared straight ahead. Not at the man, not at the crowd, just at the window. He picked up his coffee, took a sip, set it down, then, slowly, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a worn flip phone. No one had seen one in years. He opened it, pressed a number, clearly on speed dial, and held it to his ear. There was a pause. He spoke just 4 words, Callsign Alpha. Location confirmed. He closed the phone, put it down gently next to his coffee, and finally, looked up at the man who had struck him. "You'll want to leave," Raymond said calmly. "You've got about 30 minutes." Silence hung in the air like a storm cloud. The tall biker stood frozen, unsure whether to laugh, sneer, or swing again. But something about the way Raymond said it, "You've got about 30 minutes," hit differently. Not bravado, not a threat, just fact. He slowly backed away, eyes flicking to his crew. The others, emboldened seconds ago, now fidgeted in their seats, unsure whether to mock or move. In the booth across from Raymond, a man in his 50s, button-up shirt, silver wedding band, worn Dodgers cap, had watched the entire thing with narrowed eyes. He leaned slightly forward now, speaking to no one in particular. "Did he say Callsign Alpha?" A woman a few booths over, older, clutched her purse tightly. "That man, he looks familiar. I've seen his face somewhere." Whispers spread like embers. The waitress hovered near the coffee machine, trying to act natural, but her hands trembled as she poured herself a cup she wouldn't drink. The man in the Dodgers cap stood and made his way over to Raymond's booth. He didn't ask permission. He just sat across from him, nodding slowly. "Mind if I ask where you served?" Raymond looked at him, expression unreadable. "Vietnam," he said after a long pause, "and a few places they don't print on maps." The man's eyes widened. "That pin on your collar, it's from Firewatch Hill, isn't it?" Raymond's hand unconsciously touched the small, faded ribbon. "That wasn't a campaign, it was a ghost story," the man said, more to himself now. "My uncle told me about it, said a recon unit got pinned in by artillery, no extraction route, everyone thought they were gone. Then some phantom commander came out of the fog, led them all out, carrying the wounded on his back. They said he disappeared after that." He looked at Raymond, realization settling. "You're him. The Ghost of Firewatch Hill." Raymond didn't confirm. He didn't need to. Another voice joined in, this time from the far side of the diner. "I knew it," said a woman in her 60s, tears forming. "You pulled my daughter out of the rubble during the LA riots. She was only 7. You carried her 4 blocks through fire and chaos. You had a limp then too, but you didn't stop." Raymond blinked, his fingers tightening slightly around his coffee cup. "I never told anyone your name," she added. "She asked me to find you for years." The bikers, now thoroughly unnerved, were starting to shrink. They glanced at each other, whispered. One of them made a move toward the door but hesitated. The leader looked pale. "You people seriously buying this?" he spat. "Old man says a few army-sounding words and you're ready to kneel?" No one answered. The man in the Dodgers cap stood again, this time addressing the room. "You think you know who you're messing with? That man trained 3 generations of Marines, Black Ops, Recon, humanitarian extractions, you name it. The only reason he's not in history books is because he never wanted to be." Someone else added, "He doesn't brag. That's why it's real." The bikers stood up one by one, their cocky postures dissolving into anxious glances. Raymond hadn't moved. He finished his sandwich slowly, wiped his mouth with a napkin, and said quietly, "I'm no hero." The woman whose daughter he saved shook her head. "That's exactly what a real one says." The man who'd recognized Firewatch Hill leaned in one more time. "You called in Marines, didn't you? That what you meant by 30 minutes? Raymond looked him in the eye. "I didn't call them," he said. "I trained them." The low thrum of engines began to build outside, first barely audible beneath the diner's murmur, then undeniable. It wasn't the snarl of biker pipes or the idle hum of city traffic. This was deeper, heavier, coordinated. Heads turned, conversations halted. The first vehicle rolled into view, a matte black Humvee, slow and steady, bearing no markings but unmistakable in silhouette. Behind it came another, then two sleek motorcycles in formation, then a third Humvee. A chill swept through the diner, not from fear, but from the shifting gravity. Something sacred had arrived. The tall biker glanced toward the window, confusion on his face slowly giving way to something else. Dread. Is that the military? No flags, murmured someone. No license plates either. The waitress dropped her coffee cup. It shattered loudly, but no one even looked her way. All eyes were fixed outside. The Humvee doors opened. They didn't pour out, they unfolded. 6 men and women stepped onto the pavement in silent synchronization. No barking orders, no weapons drawn. Their gear was minimal. Civilian jackets, earpieces, boots laced tight, but their presence screamed discipline. At the front of the group, a young man, early 30s, tall, clean-shaven with ice-cut features, looked straight at the diner and walked in. The door opened with a chime no one noticed this time. He stepped inside and scanned the room, eyes passing over everyone before landing on Raymond. Then he nodded. "Sir," he said, loud enough to cut through the air. "Permission to enter." Raymond looked up, no surprise. Just calm, granted. The others filed in behind the lead man, forming a loose perimeter. Their eyes never stopped moving, assessing, reading postures, calculating exits. One of them took a quiet stance behind Raymond. Another stood by the kitchen door. A third near the booth where the bikers sat stiff and pale. The lead man approached Raymond's table and saluted, not sharply, but with the weight of respect. Raymond didn't return the salute, but he inclined his head ever so slightly. "We received the ping. Protocol Alpha Breaker initiated. Reinforcements were already in training rotation at the Long Beach facility." Raymond gave a soft grunt. "They're early. We didn't want to miss lunch." A ripple of nervous laughter moved through the squad, soft and respectful. The rest of the diner was dead silent. The leader turned to face the room, tone formal but not aggressive. "Ladies and gentlemen, you're in no danger. Our presence here is temporary. Please continue your meals, and please know that you're sitting in the company of a man whose service predates most of our understanding of the word." He looked toward the bikers, which makes what just happened unacceptable. The tall biker stood, suddenly trying to puff himself up again. "We didn't know who he was, man. We thought he was some homeless vet looking for attention." The Marine's expression didn't change. That would not have made it acceptable either. The leader took a step forward, closing the distance between himself and the biker who had delivered the slap. The diner's fluorescent lights seemed to dim under the weight of that gaze. "You laid a hand on a man who once stood between chaos and civilization," he said, voice even but steely, "who trained men like us when we were still nothing but nerves and noise. You're not just disrespecting him, you're disrespecting everything that kept you alive long enough to act like this." The biker opened his mouth as if to object, but nothing came out. One of his crew muttered something under his breath and quickly looked away when a second Marine locked eyes with him. Then the door opened again. This time it wasn't more Marines, it was people from the street. A few passers-by who had stopped when they saw the military vehicles outside were now pushing their phones against the glass or stepping hesitantly inside, drawn in by whispers and raw curiosity. One of them was already live streaming. Within minutes, the diner's quiet corners turned into a scene that looked like a forgotten legend unfolding. The young woman who had waited on Raymond earlier now stood near the counter, hands trembling, not in fear, but awe. She slowly raised her phone and began recording. "Is that really him?" she whispered. "That's Ghost of Firewatch Hill, right?" Someone nodded behind her. Another voice joined in. "My dad served with him, said he never spoke, never took credit, but they all followed him blindly, willingly." The crowd outside grew. A teenage boy pushed through the door, holding up an old black and white photo, a grainy image of a soldier carrying two wounded men on his back, face half covered in smoke and shadow, but unmistakably Raymond. "He carried my grandfather out of a burning compound in '68, the boy said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "My family wouldn't exist if not for him." The Marines said nothing. They didn't need to. The tension shifted from intimidation to reverence. Raymond looked around the room, at the faces now filled with recognition, not fear, the shame now clouding the bikers' expressions, the quiet professionalism of the young men and women he had once molded with blood and dust. He spoke at last. "You showed up fast," he said to the squad leader. The man nodded. "You trained us to be faster." Raymond exhaled, slow and deliberate. "Well then," he said, almost a smile in his voice, "might as well stay for pie." By the next morning, the video had gone viral, but not the one anyone in the diner had recorded. A 30-second low-resolution clip began circulating across social media platforms. It showed only the final seconds of the confrontation without sound, zoomed in from an outside angle. It captured the tall biker stepping away from Raymond's booth, visibly rattled, followed by the entrance of what looked like an armed military unit. The caption read, "Old fraud gets military backup to intimidate young patrons at La Dina. Who is this guy?" Within an hour, thousands of shares and quote tweets spread like wildfire, especially among conspiracy circles, military watchdogs, and anti-government personalities. The algorithms did the rest. They're deploying troops on civilians now? Who's funding this vet cosplay nonsense? This guy's just another stolen valor clown with connections. In the sea of comments, a single phrase repeated itself. Too clean, too orchestrated, must be staged. By midday, news anchors on second-tier networks picked it up. They didn't fact-check, didn't ask questions. They just aired the clip, repeated the framing, and invited experts to debate if the Marines were abusing power to protect a local agitator. A small-time senator from out of state even tweeted, "This is why we need stricter limits on federal deployment in urban zones." Raymond didn't respond. He didn't even own a computer. But the squad knew. They gathered at a safe house on the edge of Long Beach that night. Screens lit the room, phones, laptops, tablets, all playing back distorted versions of what had really happened. The squad leader, whose name was Garrett Voss, stood silently, arms crossed. One of the younger members, Callie, shook her head in disbelief. They erased the part where he got slapped, where people spoke up. They cut everything. "Worse," said another Marine. "They're painting him as the aggressor, like he summoned us to suppress civilians." Garrett's jaw clenched. "They're not just targeting Raymond. They're trying to rewrite the whole narrative, undermine our credibility, question his history before anyone verifies it." Someone else tapped a tablet. "Sir, someone scrubbed every mention of Firewatch Hill off DoD archives in the last 6 hours." Garrett blinked. All of it gone, like it never existed. By the following day, the narrative had mutated beyond recognition. A cable news pundit accused Raymond of being part of a covert militia group. Another show ran a segment titled, "Who's Really Pulling the Strings in Los Angeles?" while flashing Raymond's blurry diner photo on screen next to images of anti-government radicals. A satirical meme circulated widely, a doctored image of Raymond in full Rambo gear, standing on a tank, with the caption, "When your tuna melt comes with backup." None of it seemed to touch him. Raymond spent the morning sweeping the sidewalk in front of his small apartment complex. No security detail, no statement to the press, just the same quiet movements as before, deliberate, controlled, invisible. But in the digital trenches, someone else had decided to fight. Her name was Maya Rios, a veteran journalist turned independent investigator. Fired years ago for refusing to suppress a whistleblower story, Maya had since built a modest but fiercely loyal online following. She didn't care for trends, she cared for truth, and she remembered Raymond Walker. Back in 1992, during the chaos of the LA riots, Maya, then just 12 years old, had been pulled from a burning market by a limping man with smoke-blackened hands and eyes like steel. Her mother had called him an angel. Maya had never forgotten the face. Now, staring at the slander flooding her screen, she knew. Without fanfare, she launched a thread. Thread? The man you're mocking saved my life when I was 12. He didn't ask for thanks. He didn't even give his name. I just knew he limped and carried me through a war zone. Turns out he's been doing that his whole life. His name is Raymond Walker. And here's what the news won't tell you. The post exploded. Within hours, veterans began chiming in. Former Marines, Navy personnel, and field medics who'd served in Southeast Asia, Central America, and the Middle East, all sharing stories that began with the same theme. He showed up when no one else would. He refused medals, but he buried our dead. He didn't save us with orders. He saved us by standing still when everything else fell apart. One user even posted a grainy, declassified satellite image showing a remote jungle outpost labeled Firewatch Hill with a single dot labeled RW01 circled in red. Garrett Voss saw the post from the safe house. He turned the screen toward Raymond. "You're trending again, sir." Raymond didn't even glance. He just sipped his coffee. "They'll come harder now," Garrett added. "Truth rattles cages." Raymond nodded once. "Let 'em rattle." While the internet buzzed with stories of Raymond's forgotten heroism, another name began surfacing, one that hadn't appeared in any news coverage, but was quietly embedded in the metadata of the original fake video leak: Chief Alan Merritt, the current police chief of Southeast Los Angeles. He hadn't made a public statement. He didn't need to. Merritt had always known how to operate from behind tinted glass. But Garrett Voss's team noticed something strange. The diner's security system, supposedly malfunctioning, was maintained under a municipal contract renewed just 2 weeks prior. That contract, they discovered, was pushed through by Merritt's office as an emergency upgrade, despite no known incidents or vulnerabilities. Too clean. Garrett dug deeper. The diner's local beat cop, Officer Tran, had been suspiciously off-duty that day, with no substitution. The traffic cams around the block were also inactive, marked as under maintenance, again under city authorization. The pieces weren't just falling into place, they were being delivered. Garrett confronted Raymond with the findings, but the old man didn't flinch. Instead, he looked out the window and exhaled like someone watching a long-forgotten storm roll back into view. "I knew Alan Merritt when he still called himself a man," Raymond said quietly. "Back when he wore a different uniform, a long time ago." Garrett leaned forward. "You served together?" Raymond nodded once. He was a corporal, raw, eager. Too eager. He wanted war stories more than he wanted war, craved medals more than meaning. "And Firewatch Hill?" Raymond's eyes narrowed. "I gave the order to pull back. He disobeyed it. Went off-grid to try and secure some heroic footage for a reporter embedded nearby. Got 2 men killed. The third lost both legs." Garrett felt his chest tighten. "What happened after?" "I didn't court-martial him," Raymond said. "I filed it as a heat-induced decision error, covered it up, thought he'd learn." Raymond turned back to him now. He didn't. Across the city, in a private downtown office sealed off from public access, Chief Alan Merritt stood in front of a wide digital display. News clips rotated across the screens, angry pundits, viral threads defending Raymond, archival military photos suddenly resurfacing after decades in the dark. Merritt's jaw clenched. "Pull every favor we've got left," he growled to the advisor behind him. "I want him neutralized in the public eye. No medals, no mystery, just another angry old man with delusions." "But sir," the aide said carefully, "the footage is gaining traction. Maya Rios just did an interview with 3 retired Marines. They confirmed Firewatch Hill existed. The DoD hasn't denied anything yet. They won't. They can't. Too much mud in that water already." Merritt stepped closer to the screen, where Raymond's calm, steady face stared back at him from a freeze frame of the diner video. "I should have buried him when I had the chance." He turned to his staff. "I want background checks spun into rumors, mental health issues, disciplinary notes, anything. If there's nothing, fabricate it. And get a psychologist on cable to talk about hero complexes in aging veterans. Push the angle that he's suffering from cognitive decline, yes sir. And those Marines who showed up, find out where they live. I want one of them to get reckless. Something we can leak." As the room emptied, Merritt sat down, pulling open a drawer. Inside was an old, rusting service pin, identical to Raymond's but untouched by time, never worn. He stared at it for a long moment. Then he threw it into the trash. Back in Long Beach, Garrett had intercepted Merritt's next move. A press conference scheduled in 2 days, billed as a public safety update, but clearly orchestrated to frame Raymond as the catalyst for rising tensions in the city. "They're painting you as a threat to peace," Garrett said, pacing the safe house floor. "They want to pit public safety against public sentiment." Raymond simply sipped his coffee. "So let him speak," he said. "The louder they shout, the clearer the silence sounds. You're not planning to sit this out, are you?" Raymond set down his mug. "No," he said softly. "I'm planning to show up." It started with a single bouquet. Early the next morning, before the sun had fully crested over the rooftops of East Los Angeles, someone laid a small bundle of white lilies outside the diner. No note, no name, just the flowers and a folded Marine Corps handkerchief tucked beneath. By noon, the sidewalk was covered. Photos, ribbons, candles, military pins from Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, handwritten messages that said things like, "You carried my father home. They erased you from the records. We still remember. For Firewatch Hill. For all the hills." Word spread faster than Merritt's press team could keep up. What began as a quiet gesture became a visible act of resistance. Veterans from all across California, bikers, medics, chaplains, and retired officers arrived in person, taking quiet shifts, standing outside the diner in full dress uniforms, not speaking, not chanting, just standing. Some brought lawn chairs, others flags. A few simply leaned against the walls in silence. Every branch of the military was represented. A few held small signs, but none screamed. One simply read, "If they forget our heroes, we'll remind them." By 3 p.m., the national media couldn't ignore it. Helicopters hovered above, trying to capture aerial shots of what some were now calling the Watch. Independent journalists began live streaming interviews with those who showed up. Maya Rios returned to the scene with a mic, but this time she wasn't reporting from the outside. She stood in the middle of the crowd, holding up her old childhood photo of Raymond cradling her in the smoke. "He didn't just save me," she said into the camera. "He's been saving this country from its own forgetfulness for 50 years. One segment showed a man in his late 40s, his prosthetic leg painted in red, white, and blue, standing beside the diner's entrance. "I lost my leg in Ramadi," he said, "but I didn't lose my memory. Raymond Walker taught me how to walk again. You think I'm going to sit back while they slander him? Not a chance." Then came the moment no one expected. A group of teenagers from a local high school arrived, Latino, Black, Asian, all carrying poster boards that read, "Our vets deserve better, and we believe in Raymond." One of them, a senior named Tony with braids and a denim jacket, stepped up to the makeshift microphone. "We weren't born when Firewatch Hill happened. We weren't even told about it in school. But we know when something's wrong. And what y'all are doing to this man, that's wrong." His speech went viral within the hour. And then the trucks came. Not military, but food trucks. Veteran-owned businesses from around California showed up, parking in formation along the curb and serving free meals to anyone wearing a uniform or holding a ribbon. Someone projected Raymond's diner surveillance footage onto the side of a nearby building, the full version with audio, the slap, the silence, the calm. Justice was no longer just being demanded, it was being demonstrated. The networks tried to shift the narrative again. That evening, 2 major outlets ran simultaneous specials titled "The Diner Mob." Are veterans being used for political theater? And manufactured heroism when memory replaces facts. The hosts sat in comfortable studios, nodding solemnly as they dissected the risk of glorifying unverified military stories. But outside the diner, no one was listening to them anymore, because something extraordinary was happening. In cities across the country, mirror protests began emerging. In Chicago, veterans marched silently past a local courthouse with candles in hand. In Houston, families of former service members gathered at parks, sharing stories and holding signs that read, "We know our own." Even in New York City, a bronze statue of a forgotten Marine memorial was covered with letters addressed to Raymond Walker. And then came the rebuttal that made even Merritt's inner circle pause. Maya Rios dropped a full-length video documentary, The Man They Tried to Erase. It included interviews with 5 living eyewitnesses of Firewatch Hill. 2 retired generals, 1 Medal of Honor recipient, and a nurse who treated Raymond after his final extraction. The documentary ended with Maya's voiceover. "History isn't what survives documentation, it's what survives erasure." Within 4 hours, it had 10 million views. Raymond still hadn't spoken to the press, not once. But the silence had become his signature, and now that silence was being amplified by thousands who had found their voices because of him. Meanwhile, Garrett Voss was in contact with allies inside the Pentagon. Unofficially, of course. No one wanted to go on the record yet. But the sentiment was clear. Merritt's stunt had crossed a line. "Retired doesn't mean irrelevant," one high-ranking officer said quietly. "He trained us, taught us how to hold ground when others retreat. Maybe it's time we followed that lesson." Back at the diner, a new group arrived just after dusk. Marines, not active duty, retired like Raymond, but still cut from the same iron. They didn't say much. They didn't wear their ribbons. They just stood behind the line of civilians, an unspoken wall of loyalty. Someone started singing, a low, wavering baritone, from the halls of Montezuma. By the second line, others joined. By the third, it became a full chorus. Rough voices, clear hearts, united. Inside the diner, Raymond finally rose from his booth. Garrett met his eyes. "It's time," Garrett said. Raymond nodded once, straightened his collar, and walked out the front door. The press conference was held at City Hall Plaza, outdoors, but barricaded on all 4 sides. Officially, it was a community safety update, but everyone knew what it was. A stage for Chief Alan Merritt to seize back control of the narrative. Dozens of reporters crowded beneath canopies. Cameras clicked, drone feeds hovered. An LED screen behind the podium showed Merritt's face, frozen mid-sentence, waiting for its cue to dominate the airwaves. Merritt arrived in full dress blues. He walked briskly, the heels of his shoes tapping like gunfire across the concrete stage. He approached the podium, tapped the mic, and looked out at the crowd like a man surveying a battlefield he already thought he owned. "Good evening, Los Angeles," he began. "In the last few days, a series of unfortunate events and viral misinformation has created unnecessary fear and division in our community." He paused for effect, letting his voice settle over the plaza like a fog. "I want to be very clear. While we respect all who have served, no one is above the law. We are currently reviewing an incident involving an unauthorized mobilization of what appear to be private paramilitary individuals. This is not how justice operates. This is how chaos begins." He leaned forward slightly. "And chaos," he said, "is something this city will not tolerate." A few members of the crowd nodded. A handful clapped politely. The rest waited, unsure what to believe. Then a commotion rippled from the side gate. Cameras spun, security turned, and Raymond Walker walked in. No escort, no uniform, just a weathered brown jacket, boots that looked older than half the audience, and a calm, steady gait. Garrett trailed behind, silent but alert, flanked by two former Marines who took up quiet positions at the edge of the stage. Merritt froze mid-sentence. He didn't expect this. Raymond climbed the short stairs slowly, not asking permission, not seeking introduction. He stepped up beside Merritt at the podium, his presence cutting through the noise like a blade. For a long moment, neither man said anything. Then Raymond looked out at the crowd. He didn't touch the microphone. He didn't need to. "I came to listen," he said. His voice, though soft, carried like thunder. "But I hear nothing worth remembering." Merritt cleared his throat, stepping in. "Mr. Walker, this is an official city function. You remember Firewatch Hill?" Raymond asked, still facing the crowd. The question hit like a hammer. Merritt flinched. Raymond turned to him slowly. "I do," he said. "I remember the heat, the smoke, the two boys you left behind chasing a photo op." Merritt stepped back. "This isn't the time or place." Raymond raised a hand, and shockingly, Merritt stopped. The camera zoomed in, capturing every wrinkle, every scar on the veteran's face. "I didn't say a word when they buried the report. I didn't say a word when they erased the names. But you made a mistake." He turned to the crowd again. "You dragged me into the light." He looked directly at one of the cameras. "So let's talk." "You want to talk about law and order?" Raymond's voice remained steady, but every syllable rang with purpose. "Then let's begin with truth." He faced the crowd, not the cameras. In 1987, Alan Merritt abandoned a unit under fire on a hill in Cambodia. He disobeyed a direct order in pursuit of a photographer embedded nearby. 2 men died. One was 19, the other never found. Gasps rippled through the press section. Merritt turned pale. "I filed a false report to protect his future," Raymond continued. "Thought he'd grow into it. Thought I was giving a man a second chance." Raymond's gaze hardened. "Turns out, I created a coward with power." Merritt stepped forward, voice cracking under pressure. "This is slander. None of this is on record, because you erased it." Raymond barked for the first time. "And when people started remembering, you manufactured a lie to erase me too." He turned to the crowd, softer now. "I wasn't going to fight this. I've lived most of my life trying to forget that hill. But then you," he nodded toward the audience, "you started remembering. You remembered the ones they buried without names. You remembered the quiet ones who came home without parades." Raymond looked down briefly, then back at Merritt. "You tried to paint me as dangerous." He stepped closer. "But I'm not the one who sent a fake video to discredit a veteran. I'm not the one who tampered with city surveillance. I'm not the one who erased public records to protect a lie." Then Raymond reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small object, a USB drive. He held it up. "This contains unredacted transcripts, communication logs, and satellite footage from Firewatch Hill, courtesy of a Pentagon friend who owed me a favor." The crowd stirred. "Everything you've denied for 30 years," he said. "Every life lost, Every cover-up, he turned to Merritt one last time. You used to chase medals, now you chase control. But you never learned the one thing that mattered. Raymond leaned into the mic. Service is what you do when no one's watching. Merritt stepped back, visibly shaken. A reporter shouted, Chief Merritt, do you deny the charges? Another yelled, Is it true you altered city records to erase Firewatch Hill? Cameras spun. Security flinched. Then a hand landed on Merritt's shoulder. It was a federal officer. Sir, the agent said calmly, we'd like to speak with you about a few discrepancies. Merritt's mouth opened, then shut. And just like that, the man who had controlled so much, who had spoken so loudly, was escorted off stage without another word. Raymond stood alone for a moment as the plaza erupted, not in chaos but in applause. It wasn't wild, it wasn't frenzied, it was measured, respectful, earned. He didn't bow, didn't raise his hand, just stood still, then turned and walked down the steps. The crowd parted as he passed, not out of fear, but reverence. Outside the gates, Maya Rios met him at the edge. You knew he'd self-destruct, she said. Raymond didn't look at her. People like him always do. 3 days later, the headlines had changed. Chief Merritt under federal investigation. Firewatch Hill confirmed. Lost history revealed. The silent veteran who spoke for a nation. Raymond Walker, however, did not change. He declined all interviews. He turned down medals offered retroactively. He refused a ceremony proposed by the city council. Instead, he returned to the diner. Same booth, same coffee, same ritual. Outside, the vigil gradually faded. The ribbons were taken down with care. The flowers composted respectfully, but a single plaque remained, embedded in the sidewalk near the door, for Raymond Walker, who stood when others sat. The plaque didn't list his rank, not his units, just that sentence. One morning, Garrett joined him again, both of them watching the sun crawl over cracked pavement. The city hadn't changed much. The noise was back, the traffic, the grind, but people walked a little slower past the diner now, a little straighter. They're still talking about you, Garrett said, sipping his own coffee. They'll stop. They shouldn't, Raymond shrugged. I wasn't the point, he said. I was just a mirror. Garrett looked at him. So what's next? Another fight? Raymond gave a tired smile. I think I've fought enough. At that moment, a small girl no older than 10 walked up to the table. Her father stood behind her in a navy t-shirt, hand resting lightly on her shoulder. She held out a folded napkin. Raymond took it and opened it carefully. Inside was a crayon drawing of him standing beneath a flag, a group of smiling people around him. Underneath it were 6 words, "Thank you for not staying silent." Raymond stared at it for a long time, then folded it again and placed it gently into his jacket. The girl smiled shyly and ran back to her father. Garrett leaned back, letting the silence settle again. And for the first time in decades, Raymond closed his eyes, not to forget, but to finally rest. Not because the battle was over, but because the truth had been heard, and this time no one could erase it. They called it Firewatch Hill because it never slept. It wasn't a hill in the romantic sense, no waving grass, no clean ridgelines. Just a jagged outcrop of scorched red stone sitting in the middle of a jungle no map acknowledged. It overlooked a cluster of narrow trails often used by local villagers and enemy scouts. In July 1987, Raymond Walker was already a legend in whispers, though his name hadn't yet been written in any official commendation. At 41, he was older than most of the men in his unit by at least a decade, and his file was stamped with too many black lines to count. But when the world burned, they sent him. Firewatch was supposed to be a routine overwatch, hold position for 72 hours while aerial drones gathered intel. Simple, stay quiet, stay still. But the weather shifted, radio silence turned to static. And then came the smoke. Enemy fighters launched a surprise assault on a refugee convoy that had veered too close to the perimeter. Screams carried on the wind. Raymond's unit received orders to stand down. Do not engage. That was the rule, but Raymond had long since stopped believing that rules always aligned with right. He broke protocol in 12 minutes flat. "We're moving," he'd said, voice low, not requesting permission. "Sir, command says we hold. We don't hold while civilians die. If you stay, you stay. I'm not losing them." And he went. 9 followed. 3 stayed behind. Within the hour, the brush was lit in flames, gunfire, mines, confusion. He moved like smoke through it, quiet, relentless. He pulled 3 children from a burning truck, stitched a man's leg shut with fishing line, and crawled under a collapsed bridge to retrieve a wounded interpreter. They found a village center with civilians trapped beneath rubble. That's when Corporal Alan Merritt disappeared. He had slipped away, chasing after a freelance photojournalist known to be embedded nearby, hoping to get his moment, as he called it. Raymond discovered 2 of Merritt's team members dead in an alley. The third, barely breathing, told him everything. Raymond never said a word when they extracted. He just carried the wounded, carried the truth, and buried both. The brass didn't want headlines. They wanted closure, silence, and Raymond gave it to them. He wrote Merritt's report himself. Corporal Merritt acted with intent to pursue enemy movement. Loss of life occurred under unclear conditions. Recommend commendation and reassignment. They took it, promoted him, sent Raymond into obscurity. When asked about the hill later, on the record, he only ever said one thing: "We made it out. That's enough." But deep down he knew some wounds didn't bleed, some battles didn't end, and some hills never stopped burning. The first time Raymond's son saluted him, he was 7 years old, standing on a chair with a paper towel tucked into his collar like a uniform. His mother laughed and clapped. Raymond didn't smile. He just nodded and corrected his hand position. It wasn't coldness, it was distance, and it began early. Garrett Walker grew up in a home where the walls held more silence than photos, where war stories weren't told, they were buried, where dinner was a ritual of glances and unfinished sentences. His father never raised his voice, but he never said, "I'm proud of you," either. When Garrett joined the Marines at 18, people assumed it was to follow in his father's footsteps. But the truth was messier. He didn't join to honor his father, he joined to understand him. In boot camp, instructors whispered about a ghost, an old operator who trained recon teams in secret sessions. Silent, brutal, brilliant. If ghost taps you, you're either going to war or you're going to make it back. Garrett didn't realize who it was until week 6. He never said anything, neither did Raymond. They trained together in the same room, like 2 shadows pretending not to know each other. Raymond didn't give him an inch. No favoritism, no critique. Just the same hard stares and silent expectations. The fracture between them widened over time. Garrett grew into leadership roles, deployments, field operations. Each promotion was followed by a flat letter from home, never handwritten. Each homecoming was met with a handshake, not a hug. Then came the loss. Garrett's best friend and squad mate, Collins, died in a failed extraction in Kandahar. Garrett blamed himself. The command blamed terrain. Raymond sent no condolences. But one day an envelope arrived, no return address. Inside, a single photograph, Garrett in training, a younger Raymond in the background, just out of focus. Scribbled on the back were 4 words: "I taught you right." That was the closest thing to love Garrett ever received. Until the diner. When he got the ping, Callsign Alpha, he froze. He hadn't seen that protocol used in years. It was only meant for active recovery of compromised assets, or for one other thing, family. He dropped everything. 30 minutes later, he stood in a diner doorway, staring at the man he had tried to become and never truly understood. Raymond didn't thank him, didn't explain. He just said, "You got faster." And Garrett finally heard the words that had been hidden in every silence between them. The fall of Chief Alan Merritt wasn't explosive, it was surgical. Within 48 hours of the press conference, federal investigators issued formal charges: obstruction of justice, falsification of government records, abuse of authority, and conspiracy to suppress military documentation. A week later, his face was removed from every civic banner in Los Angeles. He resigned before he could be fired, but the damage was done. City officials scrambled to distance themselves, claiming ignorance, launching internal audits and public trust initiatives. But the public didn't need promises, they needed names, and that's what Raymond gave them. Through quiet coordination with Maya Rios and Garrett's military contacts, a sealed list, once buried in Department of Defense archives, was finally released. It contained over 100 names of veterans whose acts of service had been classified, ignored, or erased for political convenience. Some were living, most were not. All had stories. The list was published online, paired with a digital archive, the unwritten ledger. Veterans across the country submitted testimonies, photographs, field notes, and letters. A crowd-funded project turned it into an open-source memorial, free from red tape, managed by volunteers and veterans' families. Raymond refused to appear in the launch video. "I'm not a spokesperson," he said. "I just opened the drawer," but his name was listed at the top of the archive, beneath one simple title: the first to be forgotten, the last to be heard. As the investigation deepened, Merritt's ties to other buried operations surfaced. Approved building contracts linked to black budget funding, quiet payoffs to suppress witness statements from past scandals, manipulation of civil surveillance logs. And while his legal team tried to plea bargain, something even more damning occurred. The city council held a closed-door vote to posthumously reinstate military commendations for all names on the ledger list. Every denial, every redacted medal, every quiet service record. They passed the motion unanimously. For the first time in decades, multiple service members, living and deceased, were added back into the official military registry, and their families notified in formal ceremonies. But when they asked Raymond to attend the first event at City Hall, he declined. He wrote a single note in response: "Honor given too late is still better than never, but I'll be where they never looked, at the diner, booth by the window." In the months that followed, something began to shift, not in headlines, but in habits. The diner where Raymond had been slapped became a landmark, not because of fame, but because of memory. Schools brought students there on field trips. Veterans brought their grandchildren. Artists painted murals on nearby alleyways. Portraits of soldiers, words like service, truth, and legacy scribbled beside weathered faces. Across the street, a public bench was installed with a bronze engraving that read, "For those who served quietly, may you be remembered loudly." The community changed too. It wasn't overnight, but in neighborhoods where silence had once been safer than honesty, people began telling stories again. About uncles who never came home, aunts who served as medics in wars they were never credited for, neighbors who wore scars under long sleeves and longer silences. At a community center in Boyle Heights, a young teacher named Sophia Morales began a project called Invisible Valor. She invited local veterans to speak to students, not about glory or war, but about memory, about what it meant to be erased and what it felt like to be remembered. Raymond never accepted the invitations, but one day he mailed her a small box. Inside was a cassette tape. On it, his voice, gravelly, measured, clear. "Tell them it's okay to be quiet," he said, "but not to be forgotten." Elsewhere, police training programs began citing the Raymond incident as a case study, not just about excessive force, but about bias, dehumanization, and the consequences of institutional blindness. City councils across California passed legislation requiring veteran status protections during public incidents similar to civilian rights, but focused on dignity and due process. Garrett, meanwhile, continued working in quiet capacities. He declined offers to run for office. He declined cable interviews. Instead, he helped oversee the unwritten ledger archive, ensuring it remained nonpartisan, free to access, and updated regularly by grassroots researchers. But the biggest change came in the way people looked at old men on buses, at diners, at the park bench alone, hands calloused, face weathered. They no longer saw old, they saw possible, they saw stories. And then, one morning, without announcement, the booth by the window was empty. No coffee mug, no folded napkin, just a note taped to the glass. In Raymond's handwriting, "If you're reading this, I'm finally walking a hill that doesn't burn." No one knew exactly when he left. Garrett never said. Maya respected the silence. There was no funeral, no eulogy, just quiet, and that was how it should be. But a week later, the city held a candlelight vigil anyway. Not for spectacle, for reflection. Children held photos they had drawn. Veterans stood shoulder to shoulder in dress uniforms. The mayor read aloud every name from the unwritten ledger, and no one looked away. At the end, a single Marine rang a bell, 12 times. When asked why 12, he simply said, "One for every man and woman forgotten, and the last for the one who reminded us." This is Veteran Biker, where silence doesn't mean surrender, where old uniforms still command respect, and where justice sometimes walks in, wearing boots, not badges. Raymond Walker never asked to be remembered, but in remembering him, we remember something greater. That service doesn't end when the war is over. Sometimes it only just begins. If this story moved you, made you think, or reminded you of someone, tell us in the comments below. We read every word, and so does this growing community. Subscribe to Veteran Biker for more true-hearted stories that fight back against forgetting. Like, share, and hit the bell so you don't miss what's next. There are more stories waiting for you. Click the videos on screen now to keep watching. Someone out there still needs to be heard. Thank you for being here. We'll see you in the next tale.